Lead Drywall. So I was the person that drew the short straw last month, so that's why I get to do the program. So beware of that at the end of the meal. We draw straws. You don't want to get the short one or you'll be up here next month. But anyway, now this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. So Michelle had asked me to do this a couple months ago, and I agreed to come and do it because I have a lot of background information for this. And we've actually got a working program at Lead Drywall that we established a year ago, a little bit less than a year ago, to deal with heat-related illness exposure in the National Emphasis Program. So that's what I want to talk about today. So if y'all can't hear me at any time, I got a little problem with my voice going on, so I'll speak up, but I'll try to make sure that I'm loud enough for you. I'm encouraging questions through the whole presentation. Some of them I'm probably going to be able to answer without any problem. Other ones I may have to research, but don't hesitate to ask questions as we go through. This is a real informal presentation as far as I'm concerned. We're all family here, so without further ado, I'll go over the basic agenda of what we're going to talk about. I'm going to do an introduction to myself and the program, and then a background of the Special Emphasis Program for those of you that have not read the OSHA release on the Special Emphasis Program dealing with heat illness, injury, and prevention. Key provisions that are in that Special Emphasis Program and surrounding the development of that Special Emphasis Program. Then I'm going to specifically talk about the program that we have in place at Lead that we're very proud of. And we just won a National Safety Award generally for our safety program from the American Subcontractors Association, ASA, and our key program is included in that, and the information is considered in that. So we're really proud of that. And then, of course, open discussion, questions at the end. But again, you can ask questions anytime, so don't hesitate. So a little bit about me. I used to be a paramedic, firefighter, 911 operator, emergency room technician, chief cook and bottle washer, all of those types of things for about 12 years. And I had the chance to come over onto the safety realm of things. So I just passed my 35th anniversary just a week or so ago in safety. So as you can tell, those careers kind of overlap. I'm not as old as you think, just looking at that. So please don't read anything into that. I started my career in residential construction, so anybody that comes from residential, that's where I started out, from safety. Then I went to commercial, then I went to high rise, and then I ended up in aviation construction safety, which is a very unique niche market. And my specialty was doing aviation construction projects on active airports. So my old boss used to say that if you're doing active aviation projects on an operating airport, it's a little bit like trying to do open heart surgery while the patient is jogging. It's not very easy. So I like that analogy, so I use that quite often. So any of you that have been to airports, I'm sorry for the inconvenience I probably caused you, some of the airports you've been in, but anyway, that was part of the job. I was the construction safety manager for 5 years at LAX for the $14 billion program that they have out there, which is still ongoing. It started in 2009. They're still using the same program that we put in place in 2009. They tweaked it a couple of times, but it's still in use today. So that was my claim to fame. And I have a safety certification. I'm a certified safety executive with the World Safety Organization currently. And I'm also on the board of directors of that organization as well. So just a little bit about me. I do work for Lead Drywall, but I also do private consulting as well. And I have a few clients in this area between Naples and Fort Myers. So what is the background of the Special Emphasis Program that OSHA came out with? Well, they've always recognized that heat-related illnesses were an issue. Obviously, OSHA is always concerned about anything that can injure or hurt people, and heat is no exception. You've all had that in passing, but obviously, any of you that have been around for a while, you know that in the past they've pretty well addressed that, or expected employers to address that through prevention, internally, training, really not a structured approach to what they were looking at. They would cite under the general duty clause. That has not changed. They would still cite under the general duty clause. But a few things about the Special Emphasis Program I want to bring to your attention as we go through this today. So basically they were relying on the employers to pretty much have some kind of an informal program, or in some cases it might have been a formal program to deal with the heat illness and injury factor in construction in particular, and any kind of outside activities. Agriculture comes to mind. I live in Ave Maria, which is close to Immokalee, which is a heavy agriculture area. So that's constantly an exposure for those folks. So the background of the federal Special Emphasis Program, I heard California mentioned. You know, I worked in California for 5 years. So this is where it originated from, was California OSHA, which is Title VIII under California. It has a state program, of course, one of the most stringent in the country. And that's where they did this. They went ahead and brought their heat emphasis program in 2006. So you see there's a big lag between what California did and what the federal government did in terms of how many years it took for the federal government to come around and put a special emphasis program in place like California. Now, I have a lot of things to say about California, but one thing I will say is they were obviously ahead of the curve on this one, in coming out with their special emphasis program, and having worked there for 5 years and being inspected multiple times on a high profile project in Los Angeles. They definitely came around and checked this out to make sure that people were in compliance with what they had in their program. So, as you can see, the industries that fall into their program, without question, are agriculture, construction, landscaping, and oil and gas. They have some others that are in there too under their program, but those are the main ones. So keep that in mind. You're going to see a lot of similarities here as we go between California and federal. So this is California from their website. If you ever feel so inclined, go on their website. They have a lot of information on there, just like the federal OSHA folks do. So this is their graphic, and if you'll notice, California employers are required to take 4 steps to prevent heat illness. So beginning with training, so training all employers and supervisors about heat illness prevention. Then water, providing enough fresh water so each employee can drink at least 1 quart per hour. So you remember the ins and outs of heat illness and heat injury. If you're talking about training your folks, what's the worst case scenario that we usually train folks on? If you're involved in heavy exercise out in the hot sun, you can lose up to a quarter of an hour of fluid. Chris, sound pretty familiar? So that's where California OSHA gets that figure from, or 4 8-ounce glasses of water per hour, same difference, and encourage them to do so. Shade, so you have to provide access to shade under their program, and encourage employees to take a cool down rest for at least 5 minutes, and they should not wait until they're sick in order to take that cool down break. So it's basically an across the board, anytime they feel like they need to take a break from the heat under the Cal program, it's automatic. They get 5 minutes wherever they need to take that break, and that's an employer situation where they designate the area that they need to take a break in and plan for shade. If shade is not available, then they have to bring shade in. So in a lot of cases in California, they would bring portable canopies and those types of things out to the sites in order to provide shaded areas for folks to take their break. And then last but not least, the big thing in California's program is planning. So you had to develop, California was very specific at that time and still is, you have to have a written program under California Title 8. It's not optional. You have to have a written program. They will ask to see it when they come visit you. I guarantee it, it's standard procedure for those folks whenever they come around. So, fast forward to federal OSHA last year. So again, federal OSHA comes out with their heat illness and injury prevention program, and they came out with it in April of last year. So you can see this is just now a year old that they came out with the emphasis program. Personally, I was a little disappointed because I thought that they should have done a better job in trying to beat the drum about this being out there. I didn't really feel like there was a lot of information that was put out in advance of this emphasis program. I still don't feel like they do strong enough outreach in order to make people familiar with this program, because particularly in my consulting business, I'll ask employers about this and they know nothing about this emphasis program whatsoever. They know they have to do something for heat, but they don't realize that there's actually an emphasis program under OSHA that deals with that they have to comply with. So again, 16 years later, it took them to play catch up and finally get it. This is a 41-page document available on the internet, obviously, on OSHA's website, wherever. I would encourage you to read it if you haven't done so already. And then keep a copy of it handy, because there's several provisions in there we'll talk about. But as a refresher, it's always good to go back and brush up on the things that are required under this emphasis program. So some of the key provisions of the emphasis program are, they now determine that they can do proactive inspections in general industry, maritime construction, anything that they deem as a type of work or a work process that high heat or a particular heat exposure, indoor or outdoor. That's the caveat there. So I have a lot of folks tell me, well, we don't have to worry about the heat because we work inside all the time. Well, I've had drywall guys. Sometimes my drywall guys are doing exterior framing, so they're not inside. Sometimes they're inside, but it's in an unfinished building where they don't have air conditioning. So it still applies. It doesn't matter where they are, indoors or outdoors. So they can initiate inspections just for the fact of suspected heat exposure situation under this emphasis program. I'm not aware that they've done that yet, but I keep my ear to the ground, and it may happen at some point in time. But right now, what they seem to be doing is when they come on the site, particularly to do a programmed inspection. So if you're familiar with OSHA inspections, you know a programmed inspection is one that they show up and they usually do the entire site, wherever it is, and they'll usually ask about the heat, illness, and injury prevention program at that time, and we'll go into some of the specifics that they normally ask about when they come out. The federal emphasis program encourages employer protection of workers by water, rest, shade, adequate training, and acclimatization procedures. Sound familiar? So you can see they basically took the California blueprint and just piggybacked right off of it. Okay? The only real difference is specifically in this emphasis program and talking about acclimatization procedures. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Their program establishes heat priority days. What do they determine is a heat priority day? Well, according to the emphasis program, it's where the heat index is 80 Fahrenheit or higher. So that never happens in Florida, so we don't have to worry about that, right? It's 80 degrees on Christmas Day, we know better than that. So basically every day is a heat priority day for us, okay? So you have to plan accordingly with that. Maybe a handful of days fall below that, not very many. It targets over 70 high-risk industries. They base those target industries on BLS data, which we all know about BLS data, hopefully. Elevated numbers of fatalities based on OSHA reporting. So if you're a mandatory reporter for your OSHA statistics at the end of the year off your 300s, all right, then that's going to fall into that category. Highest number of heat-related general duty clause violations. So they will do research in the industry on the establishment. Obviously, that's a procedure for any OSHA inspection for them to do homework before they actually come out. Okay, unless it's a fatality, they might not have a chance initially to do that, but they will do it at some point. Or the highest number of OSHA heat inspections since 2017, or for those of you that are familiar with a hazard alert letter from OSHA, if a company has received hazard alert letters over a 5-year period between 2017 and 21, that automatically puts them on the list. So anything that catches their attention from a heat situation is going to prompt some type of response from them, either a full inspection or asking about it when they conduct a regular inspection, programmed inspection, or an employee complaint in particular. Could be another catalyst for doing that, all of that stuff. The emphasis program, according to what came out last year, will be in effect for at least 3 years. I say at least 3 years because it says unless it's canceled or extended. I fully do not expect the program to be canceled in any way, shape, or form. I just don't see that happening. More than likely, I see it extended, and it will probably be with us forever and ever, amen. Because we know when the government establishes something, they very rarely go back and take it back or cancel it. So I would say this is probably something moving forward, and we can probably expect a regulation at some point on this officially from OSHA. So what are some of the other provisions? Well, OSHA will inquire during their inspections regarding the existence of whether there is a heat-related hazard prevention program. So they will ask folks, particularly during the employee interview process, those of you that have been through inspections, understand that's part of their protocol. They will talk to employees, they will talk to supervisors, whoever it is that they deem might have information. May or may not talk to the safety folks, probably so, especially if they're available. But they're going to ask questions about what is your heat-related hazard prevention program? What do you do? What does it look like? Okay, and the different components. We'll assess the potential for heat-related serious illness or injury hazards. So they have an entire protocol to assess the job site, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. Program inspections on any days the National Weather Service has announced a heat warning or a heat advisory. So again, we get dozens of those every year in Florida as well. So they can use that as the impetus for conducting a program inspection on heat, particularly if they have a question about how it's being handled by the employer. OSHA will document the specifics regarding the heat-related questioning, inspections, and that type of thing. That's all the statistical and background information that they're going to gather on this because it's a special emphasis program. They're going to put all that information back in, which is why I say it probably won't be canceled, because they're going to take all that information and they're going to use it to justify the emphasis program continuing going forward unless and until they develop a standard dealing with it specifically. So they're going to have all this information that they can draw back on, and it's all going to be historic data that they're going to keep forever on what it is that they look at whenever they're doing heat-related inquiries. Employee complaints, that's going to be the big one. So again, if employees start complaining, so understand that employees are going to complain about anything and everything, and this may not be that far off when we talk about employee complaints. So On the LAX job, one of the employee complaints that actually went to Cal OSHA that they followed up on was the fact that we weren't providing drinking water that was potable, which was ridiculously stupid, but Cal OSHA came out and investigated anyway, okay? So that's the kind of things that employee complaints get generated from, is they just weren't happy with some job site conditions and they decided, hey, we're gonna stick it to these guys, so we're gonna call Cal OSHA and tell them that the water we got out here has frogs and bats and worms and snakes and everything else in it, which is ridiculous. But that's what happened. So anything heat related, probably gonna get some kind of follow-up from OSHA on it. So what are the key items that the inspectors are looking for when they come out for a heat illness and injury program? Well, the first question they're gonna ask is, do you have a written program or a written policy? Remember, I said it was mandatory under California OSHA. It is not mandatory under the special emphasis program. However, I would highly, highly, highly recommend that you have one, because that's gonna help to eliminate a lot of questions, especially if you're sticking to it like you should be. Whatever you put on paper you're adhering to, that's gonna be a good thing for you. Probably put a gold star by your name for the inspector. How did the employer monitor the ambient temperature and the levels of work exertion has to be in the mix too. So what are you using to gauge? Remember, it's the heat index. If you recall just a couple slides ago, it's not the temperature, it's the heat index. We'll dive into that more in a little bit. But how did you monitor the ambient temperature, or whoever's on site that's your representatives, and what is the level of work exertion? How did you quantify that? Was it part of the JHA, for example? So I think I just opened the door right there for some consideration. If you do JHAs as a matter of course, like we do on most of our projects, that's probably a good thing to include in the JHA, especially if you do them daily like we do. Was there an unlimited cool water supply that was easily accessible? Again, classic. California says that they have to have a quart. Again, the emphasis program for the feds doesn't say that they have to have that. They just say that they have to have an adequate quantity or an unlimited quantity. It's probably a better way to put it. That's easily accessible, which means it's close to them. They don't have to walk a mile to get to potable water, wherever that might be. And it's up to the employer to make sure that it's provided. Were there scheduled rest breaks? So again, did your supervision, in particular in our case, that's what our program hinges in, is our frontline supervisors, did they take additional breaks or hydration breaks when the temperature reached a certain level? So that's built into our program. I'll talk more about that. But are there additional breaks that are built in there? Were there scheduled rest breaks in addition to whatever other breaks you might have? Coffee breaks, lunch breaks, whatever it is that you call the breaks during the course of the day. Was there access to a shaded area? So this is critical, not just because it's a shaded area, but because when they interview particularly employees, they may ask the employee, well, where is the designated shaded area? Where are you supposed to go? Or where are you supposed to seek shade? Okay? So I would submit to you that it's a good idea to go ahead and designate those areas and make sure that you communicate those areas to the people that are working on the project site. One of the things that we ran into in our program is we use subcontractors. So the subcontractors take their direction from us, but they don't necessarily have safety training from us, except while they're on our projects. So that's one thing that our program addresses specifically, is to make sure they know where the shaded areas are on the project when they come on. And that's part of the morning huddle or the morning briefing or whatever you might call it in your shop. Does the employer provide time for acclimatization of new and returning workers? So again, in the emphasis program, they're concerned about people that come to Florida that may live in a northern climate or a northern state, coming down here to deal with the heat, especially in the middle of the summer. If you've been here during the summer, you know what our heat is like. So they're concerned about that, and also returning workers. Somebody's been out, for example, on a comp injury for 6 months, and they're coming back to work. What are the procedures and the processes that you have in place to make sure that they can adapt, especially if they're doing outside heavy work and they're exposed to heat? How are you handling that? What are your precautions for making sure that that person doesn't have a heat illness or injury system? Was a buddy system in place on hot days? So again, people working by themselves are a big concern, and they're a big concern of mine. So we always watch our work operations to see when we have to put people working by themselves and what controls we're going to put in place to account for that. But particularly with heat exposure, they want to see some kind of accountability for a buddy system or a tracking system or some way to keep track of the employees. Were administrative controls used to limit the heat exposure? So do you rotate your employees in and out? You know what administrative controls are. Do you start the day sooner in the morning? A lot of companies start work earlier in the mornings in the summertime to avoid some of the heat, quit earlier in the day, all of those types of things. Those are questions they might ask. Did the employer provide training? So we're back to training again on heat illness signs. So do they know what heat exhaustion versus heat stroke is, for example? And that becomes somewhat of a challenge when you have people that speak English as a secondary language. So you have to figure out a way to communicate that information in a way that they can understand, just like you do other safety information, how to report signs and symptoms of being overcome by the heat, who to report those to. First aid, who do we have that's trained in first aid? Remember, we have that 4 to 6 minute time frame to provide first aid in the absence of a clinic, hospital, or infirmary according to the OSHA regulation. How to contact emergency personnel. So that's not always cut and dried. We always think 911, but we're working at the airport right now. They have their own police and fire out there. So it's a 10-digit number out there. It's not 911. 911 will delay the response to that project by several minutes. So that could be critical in an emergency. Prevention and the importance of hydration. Do they understand that they have to drink fluids, how much they have to drink, how much they can lose, how diet plays into that, how their physical condition may play into that, and what they can do to increase their ability to deal with heat. This is from the Emphasis program directly. It tells compliance officers what they're supposed to document when they come on the site. The heat index and the weather data for that day. So again, how's the compliance officer doing that? And when they do, they have to make sure that they take care of business. So one of the ways that they do that is by using the OSHA and NIOSH Heat Safety Tool app. So if you didn't know, there's an app out there that is OSHA NIOSH. We carry it on our phones and tablets. All my supervisors have it on their phones and tablets. It's right there on my phone. I use it every morning. I'll explain about that. But that's the same app that they would use to go ahead and document that. Observe and document the current conditions and those at the time of the incident. So they're going to dive a little bit more into this, like wind speed, for example, relative humidity, dry bulb temperature checks, wet bulb temperature checks. So I know we all carry wet bulb thermometers in our back pocket. Okay, percentage of cloud cover. They even document that. Is there 25% cloud cover, 50% cloud cover, 100% cloud cover? What's the cloud cover? And is there a heat advisory that's been put out, a warning or alert for that day and or days prior to or afterward, after the incident occurs? All of that will be documented. Potential sources of heat illness, whether it's direct sunlight, whether they're working around hot equipment, whether they're working in closed areas with heat buildup, whatever it might be, they're going to document that as well. If they're wearing clothing, particularly PPE, so if they have to have coveralls, for example, if they're doing lead abatement, asbestos abatement, anything like that, working with chemicals that require anything that could be restrictive as far as somebody being able to sweat and control their body temperature better. Then they're going to estimate the workload exertions by the type of the job task, so they're going to document which job tasks they observed and categories such as whether it's a moderate job task, a heavy job task, a very heavy job task, and they're also going to consider the average workload and the peak workload. So do they do the same exertions all day long, or does it get heavier at certain times of the day? Are there deliveries of materials, like in our case, where they have to be outside? All of those types of things are going to be part of their documentation. And the duration of exposure during which the worker is continuously or repeatedly performing moderate to strenuous activities. So again, my guys might be hanging drywall for a few hours. They might go stock drywall because there's a delivery for a few hours out in the sun. They might come back inside. Again, it just depends on what they're up to. So that's where our JHAs come in. So a little bit about our program. This is the way we've chosen to address our response to the Emphasis program. So obviously, as everybody's probably doing, we do toolbox talks as well. At least a couple or three every year on heat exposure, hydration, the importance of skin protection, using sunblock if you're outside, those types of things. All that information is covered in our standard toolbox talks and documented through that system. So that takes care of the employees. We have several bilingual folks on our job sites, so they're able to translate that into Spanish, which is our predominant language. We don't have anybody else. Everybody that we have speaks Spanish as a primary language if they don't speak English. Okay. Then we have an annual foreman's review of heat illness. So we have monthly foreman meetings. Those are specifically for safety. We don't talk about anything else. I have a captive audience for 60 to 90 minutes every month. That's part of what we go over starting in about March, April. So we just passed our March meeting, so our meeting in April is coming up on the 1st. That'll be the topic. Will be heat illness and review for this year. So we'll go back over our program and what we do and the steps that we take to address it internally so that that information is fresh and at top of mind whenever they get out on their projects. Then we just completed the upgrade for all of our supervisors to be first aid CPR AED trained, so they all have that training heat illness and injury is part of the components of that training. We do that in-house, as we do most of our training. We do probably 80 to 90% of our training in-house now, which is a big plus. We can repeat that training anytime we want to at will, but that's a good thing. All of our supervisors are trained and certified. Then we have the implementation of our written heat illness prevention plan, which was done in May. So you'll see that the emphasis program came out from OSHA in April, and by May, we already had our written program off the ground, and we were ready to start briefing on it by the time our June foreman's meeting rolled around, which was early June. So we jumped right on it right away because we figured that it was going to be a situation where we needed to, and we wanted to address it promptly, and that's what we did. That written program will get reviewed annually. So since we came out in May, obviously we're coming up on the 1-year anniversary. So people have submitted feedback for that. We will do that review process. Again, informally as part of the foreman's meeting, people that want to make changes or suggestions or things that may or may not be working for them are going to be able to do so at that time. And we'll go ahead and make those changes. We'll have company management sign off on it. And then we'll go ahead with the revised program. We'll change the date of the program to the new revision, and then we'll move forward from there. We also use the app, as I talked about. So we use the OSHA NIOSH app, which is a very easy app to use. It's available for Android or Apple products, so you can get it either way. Doesn't matter. It's a great app to use. And then we have daily notifications on heat priority days, which is in the form of an email. So every morning, I back up the information that they should have already gotten access to before they ever started their workday. But at the start of the workday, I will examine to see what the exposure level is based on the app for that day, and I will send a notification out, and I'll show you a copy of what I send out every day. That is a read receipt situation where I send an email so I know whether it was delivered, I know whether they looked at it or not, and all that information gets cataloged on my end to make sure that all that information was disseminated, and I have proof that every foreman every day got that message. In addition to that, on their daily reports, there's a safety section. First question on the safety section is, did you evaluate the heat exposure today? Yes or no? That means they either went on the app, or at the very least, they read the email that I sent out so that they know what the exposure level is throughout the course of the day. What time it's going to get above 80 degrees if it's a day like today where it started at 10:30, and then what it's going to be like through the rest of the shift.
Hey Bill.
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
You're saying that you're getting feedback?
Yes.
How are you getting the best feedback? I mean, do you get a lot of feedback, and how do you get that, and how often?
I do get a lot of feedback. So my big thing is to spend a lot of time in the field, a lot of time one-on-one with the foreman. And as you know, if we sit in a room together and I ask for questions, we may or may not ask questions. And my foremen are probably more self-conscious than us in this room. So during the foreman's meeting, sometimes they won't want to say anything. However, when it's a one-on-one, I'm standing out on the job site and we're drinking coffee or something, or I stop in and I bring a little treat every once in a while. You know, say a lot with food. I've always said that. So you bring a little donuts out or some breakfast sandwiches. I'm telling you, the goodwill goes a long way, especially on the safety front. No question about it. So that's where I get most of my feedback, is on one-on-one. Or I'll be talking to one of the employees, or I'll be talking to one of the subcontractor employees that we'll be using. And I'll say, and I use my interpreters too, because I don't speak enough Spanish to make it in that world. I speak just enough Spanish to get thrown out of a cheesy bar in Tijuana, and that's it. So I don't even try. I go right through my interpreters, and I'll just ask basic questions. Like, I see you're doing this, I see you're doing that. How much water do you have to drink? Where did you bring some water? Because most of my folks bring water, for example. But the other day I was asking a brand new subcontracted employee, I said, well, where's your water? And he pointed to a 16-ounce bottle. I said, is that it? He says, that's it. I'm like, nah, it's not good enough. Okay, that might be good enough for the first hour, and that's it. Then you got to know, do you know where the water? No, I don't know where the, okay. Let me show you where, let me make sure you know where the water is, okay, on the job site. Now, granted, the foreman should have already taken care of that, but obviously that didn't happen. Okay, we don't live in a perfect world, I wish we did, but I came along, fortunately, behind him and was able to rectify that situation. But that's feedback that you get right from the source. So the more time you spend boots on the ground out there, the better, okay? And the better relationship with your foreman you're having. So my relationship with my foreman is like, look, I'm not the safety police, I'm not out to get you, I'm out to help both of us, so be honest with me. You know, good, bad, or indifferent, share the exact thoughts that you're having or the exact problems or issues. If you don't like something I do, tell me. I'll take criticism. I'll take it all day long. Doesn't mean we'll change the policy necessarily, because there may be a reason you don't understand why we're doing something, but I'll listen all day long. Yes?
Have you ever had issues with individuals saying that they needed to take more breaks than they should be entitled to, just to take advantage of say.
We did have one, which I'm very surprised it was only one, but that was one of the first things that was mentioned to me about, well, if we put this 5-minute clause in there, then somebody's gonna wanna take 5 minutes every hour, or every half hour, or whatever the situation is. So, having people that are trained in first aid, CPR, AED, and able to evaluate the person using the equipment that we give them goes a long way towards that as far as that goes, because it's not a situation where somebody says, oh, hey Phil, I'm gonna take 5 minutes over here, I'll call you when I'm done. No, we have a protocol. You have to notify the supervisor, you have to go to the designated shaded area, you have to have somebody with you at all times, and then the first aid, CPR, AED person evaluates you. If they determine that it's emergency and we need an ambulance, then that's gonna get called right away. And then if they have any questions, a paramedic's gonna evaluate that person. So they're gonna be able to say, yes you are, or no you're not, and go from there. So that's a professional third-party opinion. So if there's any hassle like that. This particular incident, that's what happened. They didn't realize that our folks, because we don't mark our folks. You know, a lot of people have hard hat stickers at their first aid training. We don't do that. We don't do that for a lot of reasons. But the first reason is that they need to know that there is a first aid person and who that is, but that's a verbal that we tell them. It's not something where they look around on the hard hats and they say, you are, you're not. Plus it avoids the problem if somebody loses their certification for some reason, they don't take their sticker off, that somebody thinks somebody's trained when they're not. So that's what happened. The person's like, oh yeah, I want to take a break. And then, I don't know what it was, 2 hours I think it was later, they wanted to take another 5 minutes, and they're like, okay, let me evaluate you. And by the time they were done the evaluation, they said, well look, you know, you're not having any issues, you're not having any problems, so either I'm going to call the paramedics or I'm going to call the safety director and he's going to come out and evaluate you. He was a paramedic, so if you think you got problems with me, then you're going to have to talk to him. So that solved the problem right away, never had it again. But yeah, it could happen. That's the double-edged sword side of that as far as that goes. So fortunately it hasn't been really abused to this point, so I like that. But if it gets to the point where it is abused, then we may have to rethink what we're doing. But that's a good question. So obviously our written program, April of last year or May of last year. So this is the slides that I took out of our actual foreman training that we did for the emphasis program when we rolled out the program last year. We told them that it was an emphasis program, not an OSHA standard, so they would understand that it's not an official standard, but we still can be cited under it, when the effective date was, and then what OSHA statistics were in rolling out the emphasis program. This is their numbers, not mine. Between 2015 and 19, you have 35 fatalities, 2,700 cases with days away from work, which is all taken off the OSHA 300s, 300 summaries, 300 days actually, okay? And then OSHA felt that those numbers were actually underreported because they think it could be heat-related heart attacks, other types of medical conditions, particularly breathing problems, okay? COPD, for example, if you have any folks that are suffering from respiratory illnesses, it could be aggravated by high heat exposure and those types of things. So they actually think that 2,700 number was actually higher than what that is. So they use that as the premise to go ahead and launch the emphasis program. So I told my guys again, the heat index is 80 degrees. So remember, it's not the temperature, it's the index. So that's another reason why I like to use the app. The app will actually show you the index, not just the ambient temperature. OSHA conduct pre-planned inspections on days when the National Weather Service issues a heat warning or heat advisory. So I tell them the same thing. If you're driving into work and you hear on the radio right after you get your news and your sports fix for the morning, which most of them do, if they say there's a heat warning or a heat advisory in effect, then you automatically know that you need to make sure and take extra steps under our program. And I'll talk about that in a second. High-risk industries do include construction, so we're automatically thrown in the mix for the emphasis. Compliance officers will initiate a heat-related inspection for hazardous heat conditions they observe. Anything on the 300 injury and illness log, which thank goodness we don't have any of those. We don't have any heat exposure cases from last year, and we don't have any so far this year. So hopefully we won't have any before the end of the year. And again, employee complaint is the one that I'm most concerned about, particularly with subcontractors, okay? I don't mind employees complaining, but a lot of times they will use that as a weapon, as we all know, and I do not care for that. That will get me upset faster than anything, because it's either safe or it's not. You don't use safety as a weapon under any circumstances. OSHA will use the general duty clause in order to cite this, unless and until they come out with a standard. So, what do you need to know about our program? This is specific in the way we set up our program. So all of our foremen are considered to be competent persons under our program, and we refer to them as program project coordinators or PPCs. Now, it doesn't have to be the foreman. It can be somebody like a lead person that's designated by the foreman, but they have to understand the program and they have to know what steps to take in the event that they identify a heat situation, particularly if they need first aid care and they're not the person that's qualified to render that care. So that person must check the weather forecast each day to verify the heat index. So we don't have a way to really track that except the honor system. So I believe my guys when they say they're checking, but again, we have the question on the daily reports that says, did you evaluate? And I have the emails with the read receipts and the delivery receipts. So I've got them coming or gone, and they understand that. So I think they're probably pretty diligent in checking it themselves.
Bill,
Sir.
One question,
Yep.
is there a trigger temperature for the heat index where you would just shut down operations?
We don't have one in our program. It's a consultation thing. It's kind of an informal situation. So basically, I leave it up to the PPC on each job. So what's happened is there was one project last year that wanted to shut down. So what they did is they called me and they said, under our program, I have the authority to shut down. I want to consult with you first, which I appreciated. I like that. I don't like people to just do stuff just so I'm not blindsided. So the owner doesn't call me up and say, well, how come these guys aren't working on this project? Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a balance between
There is.
the amount of time off you have to give them based on the temperature and humidity versus what is profitable to keep working.
Exactly.
And that also
Exactly.
plays in your contract.
Exactly.
So
So
it's
anytime
not
I
just
agree
the
with
medical
that,
factors.
right, and anytime I agree with that, and that's why I urge them to call me. I said, if you call me, then and I tell you it's okay, or I sign off on it, then the monkey's on my back. If you do it, monkey's on your back. I don't think you want the monkey on your back. Okay, so it would make sense to call me, so that I have to make the final call and justify that to ownership. Okay,
Makes sense.
but that was the situation. They called up. They said, we're going to call it a day early. We started early today. We're putting in our 8. You know, do you have a problem with that? I said, no, I don't have a problem with that. And I actually consulted with the regional we have 2 regional supervisors. I actually consulted with the regional supervisor too at the same time. So we had like a 3-way conference call. And I said, here's the situation. I said, I know the layout of the job. I know it's an issue. I know it's really, really hot today. And I know that they've got issues over there. And they started earlier this morning. So I think it's going to be okay from my standpoint. Is it okay from yours? And he said, yep, no problem. He said, we'll reevaluate tomorrow. And fortunately, the next day was a little cooler. But yeah. I leave a lot of discretion up to my foreman, but with that comes a lot of responsibility. And that's why I keep hammering it in those monthly meetings. I'm like, I give you authority to make certain calls, guys, but I really do appreciate a phone call so we can talk about this. So we're all on the same page because I'm a big communications guy. I just don't want to get something out of left field for any circumstances. I don't want somebody calling me up and say, oh, what was the ambulance doing on your job site? You know, that's the kind of stuff I don't like. So, like, come on, guys, please. They have to check the supply of drinking water to make sure that there is drinking water. We have pallets that are delivered to our warehouse, so they can come in anytime and pick up bottled water. Most of the GCs have water that's available, okay? And then they communicate that information to the site crews. Here's where the water is, here's how you get it, here's how you request it, all right, whatever it is. Plus, again, if they bring their own water, then they do that too as well. And say, look, you can use ours, you can use yours, doesn't matter. Okay, as long as what they're drinking out of doesn't look like it, you know, came from a junkyard someplace and, you know, has stuff growing on it and all that kind of stuff. In that case, they'll tell them they have to use ours, which is fine. If the heat index goes over 80 degrees under our program, PPC must remind employees where the drinking water is available. That's every day, so that's part of the safety huddle for sure. That generally happens regardless. The importance of drinking water, where the designated shaded areas are, and the schedule of hydration breaks. If they schedule hydration breaks, most of them do. Most of them will take a mid-morning and mid-afternoon hydration break. So you might call it a coffee break during normal work operations that aren't related to heat situation, but they call them hydration breaks. Make sure everybody takes some fluids, make sure they cool down a little bit. And they also watch for general signs and symptoms of heat illness. So the obvious things, you know, somebody starts to have issues with their consciousness level, they can't walk, they can't talk. God forbid they start having seizures, which I saw as a paramedic. That's a very scary thing to go through if people haven't seen that before, is heat seizures, all of those types of things. Under our program, if it goes over 95 degrees, first of all, I want everybody taking extra precautions, but the PPC also has to have a formal meeting, which has to be documented on our daily report. So when that temperature hits 95 degrees, they have to have a meeting before work starts at the beginning of the day. It has to be formal. They have to document that it was done, and they have to review that information and make sure that the employees understand they have to immediately report any potential signs or symptoms of heat illness. So that's where they go over the, hey, I am my brother's keeper. So I'm watching who I'm working with, because who's going to be the last person to know about a heat illness? The person suffering from it. They're going to think they're okay, I guarantee it. Person that's gonna notice is the person working next to them, or a supervisor that's checking on them, or somebody else. And then new employees have to be periodically observed. That's part of our structured program. They get part of they get the information on our program during orientation. That's a 3-hour block of time that they spend with me specifically, and we cover the heat program in that. And they are on what I call heat probation for the first 10 days. That means for the first 2 weeks that they're working, because our work week is 5 days typically, so for the first 2 weeks, that supervisor is watching that employee in particular because they understand they're new and they may need to get acclimatized. Now, if they're coming from another company, working in South Florida, doing the same work, obviously it's not quite as much emphasis on that as far as checking on them, you know, every minute, but still for the first 10 days they're on heat probation, that's what I call it. And if there's any questions, any issues, then they are under instruction to cut that employee's exposure time back to an acceptable level. And again, I urge them to call me and say, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm looking at, here's what I think with this person. They can't handle the heat quite as well. They may need to work a 6-hour day rather than an 8-hour day for a couple days until they start building up their immunity, whatever it is. Now that hasn't happened yet either, but I would expect that's the way it's to be handled because I've made that apparent to them. So the National Weather Service categorizes the heat index 4 ways into caution, extreme danger, and extreme danger. So again, these are the heat indexes, not the temperatures themselves. So that takes into account the temperature and the humidity, which the app does as well, which is why I would encourage you to get the app. It's free. Okay, everybody loves free. So it'll fall into one of those 4 categories, and my email will mimic those categories because that's what's in our program. So I will put that out at the beginning of the day saying, condition for today is a caution condition or extreme condition, whatever it is. And it usually has a little graphic like this, which is really cool because it's like a little game that I play with them now. I go hunting for new graphics all the time. So the trick is which graphic is Bill using this week, or which graphic is Bill using today? And this just happens to be the one that I was using last year for the extreme caution and danger. So I'll change it up just to see. And then when I get on site, I'll say, hey, did you see the graphic today? And they'll say, oh yeah, that's right. This one had the thermometer with the little warning thing on there. Yeah, that was pretty cool. We like that. So anyway, if you make safety fun, you get a lot more buy-in, trust me. So again, here's the apps, Android and Apple, available on Google or on the Apple Store, doesn't matter. And that's the official thing right there. You just hit that and it'll take you right to the apps. If you go on OSHA's website, it should be right there. OSHA has a link to it too. That's what it looks like when it pops up on your phone. And what the neat part is, if you've got the location feature on your phone or your tablet, in this particular case, our office is near Tice, that's why it says Tice. It's right next door, so that's the closest readout point. And it will give you the temperature and the humidity right there in front of you. It'll give you the caution, warning, or danger, obviously. This is the relative temperature, okay? And then you can go to hourly readouts. It'll give you symptoms for heat exposure on there too, what first aid is required for exhaustion and stroke, and then there's some other little gizmos in there too as far as
So
that goes.
it doesn't have anything for radiant energy like.
No, it doesn't have anything for radiant energy. It's just a very basic, very quick, down and dirty. And I like it because it's simple, okay? And I say that because I love my foreman, but none of them are going to cure cancer. That's why they're hanging drywall and overseeing drywall, okay? Just the same as I'm not going to be a rocket scientist. I'm a general safety person, construction, okay? I can tell you nothing about aerospace that way.
The other thing, Bill, I think, over on the left, it's indicated in the yellow, in the middle will be orange, and I believe all the way on the right will be red. So,
Yes.
you know, visually people can see that right away.
Yeah,
and-
yeah.
and know
It
exactly
catches
what
their
time
eye.
of day.
I think it's set up very well, myself personally. And with the hourly readouts, that's even better, because they're gonna know what time of the day it's gonna start hitting temperatures that they need to watch out for. Now remember, I'm in one location, I've got guys in 30 locations on a daily basis,
So
from
does that
Marco to
use-
Venice, so it's gonna be a variable, a little bit.
They use internet forecast or internet actual temperatures, or?
Yeah,
do
that
you
comes,
see
this,
sensor in the
yeah,
device?
this comes actually from the Weather Service through NIOSH and OSHA, but that's the information that they utilize, is
So
information.
it wouldn't be good for an interior exposure.
It wouldn't be good for an interior exposure, okay? But it's a guideline for them so that they understand what they need to watch out for, okay? And do so accordingly. Because the steps that they need to take to protect themselves are gonna be essentially the same whether it's an indoor exposure or outdoor exposure. The only question is how much more severe is an outdoor exposure gonna be, right? That sound?
No,
right?
if you're in the
Yeah,
foundry.
obviously. So I used to work at a lumber mill too, the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Enclosed, you got dryers in there drying plywood and stuff
Mhm,
like that. So
yeah.
obviously you're gonna have a higher exposure inside than you even outside in
Mhm.
those situations. So that was a problem we had there constantly, especially new people going down with the heat
Yeah.
all the time, okay? But I like this because it's a neat app. And then here's the email that I put out. This is the actual one for today. So I sent this out this morning at 7 a.m. or 7-ish a.m. somewhere around in there, maybe a little later than that. Okay. Extreme caution. What time it's going to start through the remainder of the shift. That's the first page. Then the second page is bullet items, exactly what steps that they need to take in order to be in compliance with our program. Just general reminders that they need to have. So again, if I change up the graphic, which one do you? Oh, I use the thermometer today. If I change up the graphic, then number one, that tells them that it's a different day because I send one every day typically at this time of year, right? So they're going to get one every day. And then the other thing is that it's going to kind of draw their attention to, oh yeah, this isn't just a typical email, this is one from Bill. I need to pay special attention to this. So that's the reasoning for it. So extreme caution and danger are in red. That emphasizes the point too of what the exposure level is. So I always send them out that way. And then I catalog these, so I have a running track of copies of all these emails. So if OSHA says, did you send out an email on such and such a day and who got it? I have all that information at my fingertips. So I can justify anything that I did to notify them of what the particular exposure might be for that day. Okay, so again, compliance, I review this with my supervisors. They're going to ask about written programs, water supplies, where they are, what's accessible, what kind of hydration breaks, what shaded areas there are. Now you can use vehicles for shaded areas if you designate them, but the AC has to be running. It can't be just a vehicle, or it can't be like one job site I saw not too long ago. Again, I'm a subcontractor, so I can talk about it. Okay, but I saw another trade and they had a piece of equipment parked and the guys were underneath the equipment in the shade on their lunch break. I don't think that was a designated shaded area. I don't think I'm speaking out of school on that one. That's certainly not anything I'd recommend, so I brought it to their attention. They might want to move it.
Did you copy any of the Cal OSHA requirements on shade requiring 25% of the standard workforce?
I did not, but I know that it's in there, so I didn't want to get too deep into it. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there that if you want to develop your own program, you probably should take a look at the Cal standard. And I know you work in California, or you at least visit, right?
I lived there and worked here 12
Okay,
years.
well there you go. So.
So how do you determine the size of the shade and the canopies?
I don't, other than the fact that in this emphasis program, it just basically says that it has to accommodate the most people that might be there. So in our case, it's generally a building that's under construction. There's a general area someplace within the building structure usually that they can designate as an area. I try to get it so that they designate an area that's close to access. So if they do call paramedics, that they can get an ambulance close, because they don't want people traveling across the job site, particularly if they're, you know, semi-conscious or whatever it is that might be happening from the heat exposure, that type of thing. So I'm trying to get them to use common sense into where are you designating the shaded areas. So that'll be another conversation I have when I go to the job site. I'll just ask, I'll say, well, on this particular, because we may only be on a project for a few days, and then we might be moving on, because we finish our work and that's it. And we usually pack up and go and move on to the next job. So the designated spot on this job is probably not the same as the one on the next job, so that'll be a point of conversation when I do my inspections. Okay, where's your designated, what do you use it for your designated shaded areas? Just to make sure, number one, that they are doing it, and number two, that they're using common sense, which we understand is not so common in some situations. Some of my guys, I'm not sure they can find their way back to the job site if they don't drop breadcrumbs the night before. They're great guys, but you know, they got issues with you know, common sense and directions and that type of thing. So that's what I do. But it's good so that I can tell kind of sort of if they're in the game or they're not. And then if acclimatization, if I have a new employee there, I'm going to know that they're there ahead of time, because I'm going to know which jobs that they were assigned to, and I'm going to ask. I'm going to say, hey, John Jones was just hired a couple of days ago. How's he doing? You know, have you seen anything? You seen any issues? Because you know he's from Alaska. You know, so he's probably going to have a hard time with the heat for a while here. So. Again, that's just topics of conversation, which is that relationship key that you have to have with your supervisors. That's how you get buy-in. That's how we won our award. It's not me, it's those guys. Those guys are getting it done every day, so it's good. Buddy system in place. So our buddy system is verbal in most cases, but in the very least, it's some type of electronic, making sure that they have a cell phone at the very least and they can call. They have the supervisor's number, particularly subs. That's handled at the beginning of the day in the safety huddle. He's going to find the new people. This is my cell phone number. Write it down, put it in your phone. I'll call you, I'll text you, you save it, whatever the deal is, so that they have the number. Administrative controls, again, that's usually not something that we practice, but you know what administrative controls are. You can put them in there. And then the training that's provided on heat illness. So again, that's toolbox talks, that's daily huddles, that's all the types of things that they're doing with the employees so that they understand what are the symptoms, what does it look like, especially the difference between exhaustion and stroke, because we know stroke is life-threatening, we know exhaustion may or may not be. So what's the difference? Can you tell the difference? What should you be looking for? So just basic things like that. And then how to report incidents, who's trained in first aid again, emergency procedures. The general contractor may have additional emergency procedures. They may have an AED. Our folks are trained in AEDs, but we don't provide AEDs on project sites. We can't. 30 project sites, we can't afford 30 AEDs. So we will piggyback off the GCs. So that'll be something the first aid person, that's their mandatory. That'll be another topic of conversation. If I'm there and I'm talking to my guy that's trained in first aid, I'm gonna say, hey, is there an AED on it? I'll already know the answer, but I'll ask them. Is there an AED on the site? Yes or no? Where is it? Again, I'm not trying to trip them up. I just know that in an emergency, if they need it, they got 4 to 6 minutes, that's it. It's gotta be there if they need it. All right. Any questions?
Right, so OSHA will use 581.
Yes.
And one of the conditions for using that is that has to be a feasible means to abate. So
Yes.
what are their go-tos for that? Does anyone have any experience with either ANSI, ASSE, or ISO standards to give some flexibility?
I don't right off the top of my head, and like I said, I'm kind of waiting to hear from folks like you and other people that I have contact with in the business to see who's been inspected and what that looks like from their standpoint. If they are able to solicit any information, if we can inspect it, that's going to be a question I'm going to ask a compliance officer for sure. And say, do you have standards? Now, if you look in the 41-page emphasis program, in the back, there's actually a section that talks about how to write up. It's directed obviously at the compliance officers. This is how you write up a 5A1 under this emphasis program. This is how you write up a letter.
So we got ACGIH and NIOSH.
Yeah.
It's probably what they
Yeah,
use.
I would imagine that's what they use, but again, I'd really like firsthand information because we deal with 2 area offices. I'm sure a lot of you do too. Everything Lee and North is Tampa. Everything Collier and East
Yeah,
is
well,
Fort Lauderdale. So.
I was hit by OSHA in Nebraska, and it was a case that we had a marginally healthy worker that we weren't aware had problems.
Right.
He got taken down by the heat, complained, also did an ADA complaint, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Even though we had a heat program, everything passed OSHA muster, they still were gonna issue a violation, and we went to an agreement, and we had to retrain everybody on our existing program, even though we had documentation of that. They just did it because they didn't wanna give anything up.
Yeah, what was the basis that they were using? I'm just curious.
I don't remember, but it didn't seem like it was very substantial, and the corporate safety director was, well, I'll just give it to them, we'll do the retraining.
Now, you and I both know that documentation is the only thing, especially when you're talking, being a former paramedic, I can tell you firsthand that their personal medical condition figures a lot into the heat situation as far as that goes. So the more information you have that you can deal with it that way, that's your only defense in that situation. And I've been where you're at. I've been cited, unjustly, I'll say, for lack of a better term.
So it was
because they
interesting to
wanted
go
write
into the
something.
OSHA websites and pick up an industry or look for a newspaper article and do a FOIA on it,
Yeah.
get their files and go through it, but I have never done that for heat.
Now, I will remind everybody that we're having our OSHA breakfast in combination with ASA on May the 18th, and there will be a voluntary compliance officer out of the Tampa office there. So I've heard before she's very good. Unfortunately, I'll be on vacation, but I've heard her before, so I kind of got the Cliff's Notes of all that stuff. But that would be a good question to ask her. She may be able to shed some light on what it is they're using for criteria in the Tampa office anyway, since that's where she's out of. So, and my experience with her is she's very good at answering questions.
ACGIHS.
Yeah.
When I was in California before they put that law into effect,
Right.
and I was one of the people fighting with them.
Right.
Because we already had a pretty nice standard in the IHA world.
Right.
Yeah.
But, I get why they wanted to do some stuff, but,
Yep.
when it first came out, it was written so poorly in California, it was just a constant battle.
Yeah.
I think they just had arbitrary numbers, decisions, things, how do you, they still, I think, require shade, I think, within 250 feet.
Yeah, it's
And,
very bizarre.
How do you do that on a roadway crew?
Yeah,
paving asphalt. You just have one guy running around with a tent.
yeah.
Yeah.
Duh.
Hey, I got cited for a hand washing facility. It was the same way. It was 75 yards, and the compliance officer says that's too far. I'm like, where do you get that from? He's
Yeah.
like, well,
Yeah.
I'm telling you it's too far. I'm like, okay. What is God telling you or what? I don't get it. I mean, there's nothing in the standard that says as long as it's available. 75 yards is not. I mean, if there was beer at 75 yards, you would be crushed trying to make it there before these guys.
And a word of caution, if you're looking for a standard, don't use any of the DOD standards, because those are set up for a population that is probably not typical of yours, and their risk tolerance is probably a lot higher than yours, so.
Yep.
Yeah, right.
They're good standards for what they do, but not for the typical employee.
Yeah, agreed.
I know it's kind of a different level and it gets it a little more complex, but when you say like, 1 quart of water every hour,
Right.
I know there's things like squinchers and,
Yep.
things for electrolytes and
Sure.
whatever, and, are those conversations being had, or is it kind of like if they ask, or?
If they ask, we don't provide that. That's not something that we provide. We just go with the water because that's the basic across the board for us, is we just talk about water. If they want to provide sports drinks or whatever, as far as that goes, the one thing that we are adamant about obviously is caffeine. So we had that situation in California, had a guy down 6 Red Bulls because he was working 2 jobs, and then all of a sudden he went down. Well, it wasn't because of the heat, it was because he was overloaded on caffeine.
It did not
Right.
give him
So
sense.
that's part of it. So
But so
that's
like
what we tell them.
education on, a good choice in sports drink,
Yeah.
or, there's just another thing that I find super interesting. I don't specialize in it, but my sports dietitian friends
Yes.
know, like sweat sodium testing, because like some
Mhm.
people
Sure.
sweat a lot more sodium out than
Yep.
others, and
Yep.
that, really determines a
And
lot
that's
of
the way we
changes.
present it. This is just general baseline
Yeah.
across the board, because it's the same way with nutrition. I'll talk with my foreman, okay, you got a choice. You're gonna have a hot pizza in the middle of July for lunch, or are you gonna have, something that's a little cooler, like some fruit or something like that. Obviously, they may or may not, but at least they have the information.
Right.
Okay, what foods can you eat that are high in potassium? What foods can you eat that are high in water content? All that.
So, 2 other things that we ran into California, and the reason I'm bringing it up is because inevitably the federal government will screw something up.
Well, they're just gonna mimic California. They always do.
But in California, when it first came out, and I believe they've backed off on this, the whole regulation said water, 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 water. We had a few clients get cited for Gatorade
Uh-huh.
because you were not compliant with the provision of
Water.
water.
Right.
But
Now,
there's
it's
water in
insane.
Gatorade.
Yeah,
That's my argument.
it's insane, but
Yeah.
I'm just telling you, that's like the first few years, those are the things we find.
Yeah, if you've been in this business long enough, you're gonna find
Other
that.
thing that they started citing you on and getting, looking for was, to your point, how do you determine how are you teaching your people whether they're dehydrated or not? So
Right.
everyone's, like, basically in California now, if you go into a porta potty, there's gonna be a thing there.
Right.
The
That has the
color
color
coding.
of your
Yeah.
urine.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You're
You
in
know,
color
Yeah.
so, and it's, it gets the yellower, the more
Smart.
dehydrated and all that. I guess if it's red, they say really don't get it.
Yeah, yeah,
But,
yeah. You gotta go to your urologist
it's-
for that.
And all the porta potties have that. And so they started, that was a way to try and show, hey, we do talk to them, we do show them. The artwork that was driven on, written on them could be interesting.
I
but,
was gonna say, you got any pictures of that?
I probably do, actually. But those are just 2 other things that,
Yeah.
again, just being the federal government, if they mimic you, don't be shocked that if a federal OSHA inspector says, well, our standard says water. You provided Gatorade.
Yeah.
It's insane,
Yes.
but it's the government. And so just be prepared for those types of things. And that's what, again, they've rewritten the Cal OSHA standard. I think they're on the 4th edition right now.
That sounds right.
Because the original one didn't even cover a door. You
Yeah,
can
and
work the door at 200
the NDP
degrees.
came out in 22, right? I mean, it's recent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Sir.
I'm sure all of you guys have been on the work side, and this guy's the work, the laborers are like ninjas. You can't even tell if they're sweating.
Mhm.
They have a hood on, they have a mask on, they have the long sleeve, they have gloves, glasses. I had an OSHA come out to one of my work sites.
Mhm.
One of the questions was, how can you determine if that person is dehydrated? I told him, I said, look at them. They're working, they're dressed like ninjas, how can we tell them? I talked to them, I have to phone and ask them, are you drinking water? Are you continually drinking water during the day? And sometimes they tell you yes, but they're not.
Yeah.
And that's where you run into the problem. I mean, you can train them, you can teach them, you can show them, but if they don't do it, you're
Right.
sunk.
But how they're dressing is often correct.
Yes,
It's
it
us
is.
that's
It is.
me is the problem.
Sure.
I mean, out in California, you know, we were doing 118, 119 degree days in Valencia, and those folks, I mean, they're generally Mexican.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, from Mexico, and that heat, they have like a loose kind of,
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah.
not sweater,
Sweatshirt.
Skin,
sweatshirt,
like
like
skin.
Yeah, like you don't see much of them.
Yep.
And they're fine.
They
I
are.
mean, they come over
Yeah.
and make fun of me because I'm in a t-shirt. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, you're stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, all right.
Cover up,
Thanks.
that's what they say.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess you can kind of tell if it, depending on the color of it, like if they're really sweating, if it's sticking to
Sure.
them, or if it's
Breathing
not.
heavy.
But then also, it's like you want breathable stuff.
Well,
It's
they
really
layer.
bad when they stop sweating.
Yeah.
But do you, like, are you seeing
You
that?
know,
That's
they layer it, so it's really hard to see.
Right.
To your point,
To determine if
That's a really good
over
point.
sweating.
to your point earlier, you know, the ACGIH, the threshold limit values for biological indices and all that, actually has a chart that tells you based on the clothing they wear how many degrees to add
Right.
to their workload.
Right.
That's right in there. It's a very easy thing to look up. For the most part, cotton clothing, like clothing, I believe, will go on limit is 0.
Right.
But you start throwing on anything like
Any
tie-dye
kind of blend.
suit or something like that, you can add a lot.
Oh,
to your
well,
heat strength.
color
Yeah.
and all those things make
Yeah.
it.
And the only other thing I could
Different.
mention to your point is, schedule breaks. You know? And then encourage them to
So-
drink during the break, so at least you've got witnesses to say, yeah, this guy drank it, you know?
The gym.
That's it. That's all you can do.
There's no